Hey, I want to welcome you to the first video in an entire series all about home walls. My name is Josh, and welcome to Real World Climbing. Alright, home climbing walls. Let's get after it. I want to give you a little bit of context on where we're at with things, depending on what timing you're watching this video. So I'm recording this video in March of 2021, and if you look at the last year, what we've been experiencing is a lot of lockdowns and closures of gyms, maybe temporary closures or even extended closures of climbing gyms due to this virus thing you may have heard of. So there's been a significant rise in the popularity of home walls for obvious reasons. I want to let you know that I've definitely been into home walls before the pandemic and all that stuff. My perspective on home walls goes all the way back to the founding of Real World Climbing, which is that home walls are an incredible tool for those climbers that have busy lives, maybe have children and they don't want to find babysitters to go to the climbing gym on a regular basis, and they still want to improve in their climbing. So I've actually lived in or owned 4 homes in my adult life, and all 4 of those homes I've made sure to do some form of a home wall. And in this first video of the home wall climbing series, what I want to do is I want to share some history, some thought process, maybe even some tips and tricks that I've learned in the building of the first 3 of those 4 home walls. Then later on in the series, we're actually going to go through the actual build of this 4th home wall. Each of the home walls that I've built, I've called Real World Climbing Headquarters. So this is Real World Climbing Headquarters version 4. So why don't we jump into the first home wall that I built. I apologize for the graininess of this photo. This is what technology was like back in 2008. So this is the first home wall that I built for myself, and it is a freestanding lean-to style. So just some specs on this wall. It is 6 feet wide by 8 feet tall. You'll notice I have this ninja wall here. So the ninja painting on this piece of plywood actually has a story that goes with it. So this ninja was for a youth event that I was volunteering at, and they were using it for some kind of skateboard ramp or something like that. And so when the event was done, I asked if I could keep it. So I inherited a piece of quality plywood with a cool painting on it. So I made sure to incorporate that into my climbing wall. A couple other fun stories about this. So the other pieces of plywood that you see here on the side here, down on the bottom, are pieces of plywood that I inherited from a job that I was working at. So it was sitting around, actually it was like hiding behind a trash compactor and things like that. And so I offered to clean it up and take it off of their hands, and they allowed me to have the plywood for free. So then I went and I designed it based on the specs of the room. So this is in the basement of the first house that we owned. And in the basement, the ceilings are only about 7 feet high, I believe. To be able to get it in here, I had to do all the measurements and do all the calculations of angles. So I believe this is about a 30-degree angle overhanging, even though the picture is hard to show. One of the other things I really like about this photo is reminiscing about some of the earliest holds that I ever got. And so you'll see like these red ones right here. These are some 3-ball holds that 3Ball sent to me way back in the day to do a review. So a bunch of the older Metolius shapes you can kind of see here. And I got those from gift cards that people would buy me for REI, things like that. Even some Revolution holds. This one here is a Revolution hold. This is Revolution. So Revolution is a spin-off of Pusher. Some fun little reminiscing about some of these holds. I think that's about it for this first wall. We ended up keeping this wall for about a year, and then we sold that house and we moved. The second home wall that I built was in a garage of a rental townhouse. I did make sure to get permission from the owner before I built the climbing wall, and I made sure to leave the garage in better condition than when I found it. So this is the beginnings of home wall number 2. This here is my oldest son. In this picture, he's probably about 1.5, and now he's a teenager, so that's pretty crazy. And so this here is the beginning framing of a 30-degree wall. And this is the first time that I actually utilized this concept of using, 2x12, or I think these are 2x8s, as like a kickboard. And so you just stack them, so to speak, or lie them next to each other. And they're great for putting screw-on holds down there. And so I've actually utilized that a few times, and I really like that as a simple way to do a kickboard. And then this is about a 30-degree angle that's going to be built here. I have these stringers that are secured into the joists of the ceiling here. And you really want to know which direction the joists are going when you do that. And this is actually spreading the weight bearing across multiple joists. One thing I did on this one that I haven't done since is I ended up purchasing these metal bracket pieces that are 2x4 shaped, and I used those for securing. So I would secure those to the kickboard and then secured those up top, and then I put in the studs and secured them that way. It worked fine, but I think it was just more work than it was worth. But it did allow me to do one stud at a time rather than building an entire frame and then raising it up. Behind here, you'll see that I put a support piece here, and in a little bit, you'll see that I actually end up tying that into each of these studs for a little bit of horizontal bracing and a fun little feature that we'll see in a second. I've built a 15-degree wall over here and a little bit of a transition here. And then you'll see that I put those support pieces across here as well. And then over here, I ended up having a 4x8 section of vertical. Now you might be asking, what's the deal with this crooked piece here? And you'll see that in a little bit. So in this step, I started putting blocking in for some stability that way. And here we've started to put some of the plywood on. So this is reused. So this is 6 feet wide, and this is a 15-degree angle, as I mentioned before. And this is reused from that first wall. And you'll see the Ninja is going to end up going up here. This is where I ended up installing my hangboard on the side, and that worked out well as well. Continuing the plywood installation, making sure to reuse that Ninja wall for sure. So here is that vertical piece, and like I mentioned before, I'd actually inherited another piece of plywood, but it was cut in this diagonal fashion. So this is just my way of reusing that plywood. And since it's on a vertical and it doesn't have a lot of outward force, I don't feel like there was any compromise with the structure with that diagonal. So this is the last photo I have of the build out process. I did end up putting in some more plywood here in the transition, but you can see that I've got a 30-degree wall, a 15-degree wall, a transition wall, and then I put little side pieces in here, but I left this open. And so this ended up being a fun little storage space as well as a fort for my children to play in. So that is home wall number 2. We ended up using this wall for about 3 years, and it was a good wall. Like I said, this is a rental, so I made sure I cleared it with the landlord before I did all this. And the only real piece was these holes that went in through the drywall of the ceiling and a little bit on the walls, and I made sure to fill those and leave the garage in better condition than when we moved in. And we're on to home wall number 3. Home wall number 3 is again in a garage. So why don't we jump back in time about a year to when I was tearing that climbing wall down. I'm going to give you a video tour of the climbing wall, and we'll go into all the details. So while everybody is building home walls during the coronavirus, unfortunately, or fortunately, but I'm going to be tearing down my home wall. So I'm going to give you guys a tour before we take it apart. What I'm going to show you here is my winter setup. So this is our garage, and I do like to park my cars in here during the winter. And so the winter setup is I have a tarp over here that is just strapped up with some webbing to be held up so that I can pull my car in. And then when I want to climb, I just let the tarp down, and that way it doesn't get my mats wet and things like that. So I'm just going to kind of show you how I take that apart, and then we'll go from there. There we go. We'll pull the tarp out, and we're basically ready to climb, just rearrange things. So this 25-degree wall is probably my favorite wall out of all of them. It's nice and wide, straight angle. Got the extension that goes up past the ceiling joists here. Probably not exactly code, but it's definitely over-engineered. Over here on the arete is something I'm pretty proud of, is just some skateboard grip tape. So sticky on one side and just cut it in strips and stick it right on there. You have a nice little texture on the aretes there. This is a 45-degree wall, 6 feet wide. And then where it finishes, it's got these finishing jugs that are built into the design. Finish on the jugs, yep, right there in between those. This wall here was the last one that I built. It's not my favorite wall, and it definitely is the one that gets used the least. Honestly, the design of it, I wish I liked, and I would like it, but I wish it was taller, as in, I like the idea of having a gradual and then having this steep roof, and then being able to pull the head wall. The issue is I wish there was more distance at the head wall, like a good full 8 feet of climbable, so that way you can actually pull the head wall instead of just kind of finishing with your feet below here still. Part of the design here is behind the wall, we framed it all in with flooring, and so that's a big fort. It's a giant fort that goes all the way through there into the back as well. So this section here is 30 degrees overhanging and goes up into the ceiling again. And then this transition wall, probably about 12 degrees, I guess, if I were to guess. One thing I forgot to say about this head wall is I also built in this hand crack right here. It's designed into it. So you can, if you're a good hand jammer, you can hang your full weight on your hands inside that crack. Alright, so now that everybody is building climbing walls for the coronavirus, I'm actually going to be taking this apart. So we are moving to Colorado, where I have my own real mountains, and finally got to take the garage wall apart, but I'll take you along with that journey. All right, now welcome to Real World Climbing Headquarters number 3. So this is another garage wall. Had a little bit taller ceilings in this wall, and definitely more width and more space. And this isn't a rental, we own this house. And I was able to be a little bit more intrusive and make a little bit more bold decisions with the build. So this first section of wall that's going up is about 25 degrees, and it goes right up to the edge of the rails for the garage door. I wanted to maximize my space. I really like this angle. Here's my second son, my middle son, at about the same age, probably about 2 years old or so. So in this wall, I used a kickboard with 2x12, and again, that worked out really, really well. But this time, I built an actual frame with a toe plate, top plate, and then built in the studs and raised it into place. I did the same tactic where I braced it to the back wall as well for a little bit more of the outward. Even though most of the weight is coming down, I wanted to have a little bit more of an outward support. And then we put in scrap pieces of particle board and built out a fort for the kids, as you saw in the tour. Here's the second wall that we built out. It is 4 feet wide and at about 30 degrees. And it meets at a point up here with that 25-degree wall. So that way we can utilize the space as best as possible. And then this will end up being a transition wall here as well. And you can see that 2x12 just wraps right around. Just throw in some screw-on jibs on there, and it's fantastic. And then to the left of that 30-degree wall, we had a 6 feet wide section of 45 degrees. And you can see how intense that angle is. And that I did use a bigger kicker, so I actually framed in a kicker. So you can see that kicker right here as I've started to put plywood on, and I framed in that kicker as well. And so this plywood here, it's new plywood to me in this build, but I actually reused that from somebody else's climbing wall. And so it was already T-nutted, already had some textured paint on there, and again, we're reusing as much as possible. So here you can see what really the first iteration of this, before modifications and expansions started to happen, of this Real World Climbing Headquarters Part 3. So with all sheeted up, these pieces were on the previous wall. Here's that ninja wall being incorporated again, and then framing in the sides here as well with reused plywood as well. Back here is that entrance to the fort, and that is entirely carpeted behind there. Now I did end up doing some modifications and some expansions, so I wanted a little bit more height. So I ended up opening up the ceiling a little bit and going up through the joists and into the attic of the garage. Now I did end up reinforcing all the joists and making it really, really strong. Keep in mind that I'm not an engineer, but I did really overdo things with the over-engineering of this and just adding additional stability everywhere. So again, I'm reusing just scrap pieces of plywood that I was able to acquire, and I was able to get an additional 2 feet and even 3 and almost 4 feet in some areas of vertical height. So this is the wall in its entirety, kind of a panoramic shot here after all of the expansions were done. So you've seen a lot of this detail. You've also seen it in the video. So one thing that I forgot to mention in the tour video is this campus board that I built, this little mini campus board. It's 5 rungs. You can't see the remaining rungs because they go up into that ceiling portion, but it's 5 rungs, handmade rungs, as well as the board itself. And it's secured in there with a cantilever system, which I thought was pretty unique as well. So I ended up reusing this, and you'll see that again very soon in Real World Climbing Headquarters Part 4. So this wall was great for us. We ended up getting 8 great years out of this wall, and then we did our move. So it was kind of bittersweet to take this wall down and apart, but obviously we're excited about being in Colorado now, and I made sure to be able to build another wall. So there you have it. That's Homewalls 1, 2, and 3, all in Minnesota, but as you saw, we made a move and we moved to Colorado. So that brings us to the next phase in Homewalls, which is the building of Real World Climbing Headquarters number 4, which you see part of behind me right now. So what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to go through the actual planning of building this climbing wall. And then we'll go into the actual build out and even some customization. So stay tuned for future videos in the Homewall climbing series, as well as some training videos that are going to be coming out, and lots of fun stuff for real world climbers. I would encourage you to click the chains on that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys very soon.